Gentlemen, I would like you to cast your minds back to the 90s and early 2000s.
10 years ago.
Yes.
I remember it well.
Do you remember how back in the day of dial-up, when you wanted to download something and you'd have your little buffering bar? Yeah, you have your
Take
buffering
all
bar.
day to download a 3 megabyte song that turned
Yeah.
out to be the wrong song.
Yep. You had your little green progress bar, and as it slowly ticked up to completion, you'd get to that little bit left at the end, and you would desperately watch as the time left would tick down, and you'd get to like, there's 1 minute and 30 seconds left to completion, but that would stay there for 17 minutes, and then maybe if you were lucky, it would go up to about 3 minutes or something. So
And that's when a brother would pick up the phone and disconnect you.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly right. But it was always like that last little bit that felt interminable, where you would never get to the end. So this is how I feel about the last 100 pages of Moby Dick, which is all what I've got left, as you can see here. I I cannot tell you, every time I pick up this book now, I read a page and I I don't know what he's talking about.
He's talking about a whale by the
He's
name of
really
Moby
not
Dick.
yet.
Yeah, if you haven't realized it's about a whale yet, you're really missing the point.
Okay, so admittedly, I am starting to get to some interesting parts. I really wish I could have said that with more than 100 pages left to go in a 580-page book. Um, so that's where I'm up to.
You just wanted to get this off your chest.
I really did. Welcome to We're Not Helpful, everyone, a podcast about books, our recommendations, thoughts, and opinions. Our opinions are don't read Moby Dick at the moment, unless actually, Brayton. Hang on. I'm Eloise. Joining me is Brayton and Julian. Hello.
Hi.
Brayton, what have you done this week, Brayton?
I caught COVID.
No, I'm other than catching the
apart
spicy.
from apart from catching the spicy cough. I've got the spicy cough.
Yes.
But no, I'm doing fine. I finished Moby Dick
Yeah.
on audiobook.
What did you think of Moby Dick, Brayton?
Audiobook is definitely the way to do it. I think I've got a lot of thoughts about Moby Dick, which I think we had talked about saving for a special like Moby Dick retrospective episode. Once
Yes.
you have finished it, we will have an in-depth discussion about this novel once you're finished, I think, Eloise.
And look, admittedly, I complain about it being like the last 100 pages. I really do think by the time we record next, I will have finished it because I am going to push through this. I am going to
So
get this
yeah,
done.
so look out at some point in the future for a very special Moby Dick episode.
Yes.
I'm just
Um,
going on record to say that I refuse to read this book
I really
because
want you to. I want you to read
I
it half read it, and then half listen to it, and then tell me what
I
set up.
refuse to read these days for anything other than my own personal enjoyment, unless it's for work. So I'm not going to put myself through that.
I look, you know what? I recommend that. So,
no,
uh,
you know what? I will say the story itself and the writing and everything like that, I really, actually, really enjoyed. I thought it was very good. There are a lot of bits that do seem very random and
mhm.
unnecessary.
Well,
I
I will
don't
watch the film
know.
adaptation.
Yes,
Yeah,
you
just
can
just
do
do
that.
that.
Watch the film adaptation.
I'm not sure if it was written from a point of view of like people that read this book are not going to know much about whaling, so I have to give all this context in regards to how whaling is, I guess, what the process of whaling is, which would explain why there. It almost seems like there's non-fiction chapters just inserted into this.
I think Herman Melville is just undiagnosed ASD and really, really likes boats.
Maybe. But I intend when we do our Moby Dick retrospective, I'm actually going to do some research and hopefully actually be able to talk about potentially why it is structured like this? Because I don't know. I haven't done any research yet. It just seems like an odd way of doing it. And I kept thinking the whole way through that this book is the epitome of show, don't tell,
Mm,
where instead of just showing us how it's done, he's just telling us how whaling is done
yes,
rather than
literally
inserting it
in great detail.
as a storyline.
But he's doing it in such a way that I don't understand what he's talking about. Like I admittedly have felt so dumb reading this book. There's just did you notice that there is like a chapter where he talks about the dictionary and then uses as many words from the dictionary as possible? I'm like,
It's
he's taking the piss now, surely.
it's like he just discovered what a dictionary is.
I think so. It's like he discovered this book and thought, I'm going to use as many words. It's like one of those word of the day calendars. And it's like
Mm.
challenge accepted to put this word into a sentence today. And he saved it up for a week and a half to do that. Uh,
Well,
but
I will say we did get a follow-up email from our Irish listener Sylvia about
thank
Moby Dick.
God.
Would you like to hear it?
Please, because you haven't actually read this to me yet.
No,
So
I
I will
wanted
be
to keep
pleasantly surprised
yes, I wanted to
what the
keep it a
response is.
surprise for you all.
Excellent.
Let me just get it up here. She says, the trope of men. Or sorry, let me start again. Hello there, General Kenobi. No, that's just me.
She didn't put that in.
No, she didn't. That's just me. The trope of men are the real monsters is overdone now, but it would have been shocking back in the 19th century. Because I think we
Mm,
talked about that last
yeah.
episode about whether that would have been seen as something unusual back then.
Yes.
Specifically for a nation that was pushing westwards on the idea that they were appointed by God to kill and waste anything and anybody that stood in their way.
Mm,
The idea that human beings could descend into animal/brutal behavior, specifically those regarded as civilized, was horrifying, but also luring and attractive. Think of the fascination people in the 19th century had with stories of feral kids and orphans that landed in an entirely different environment/social class, but she has always been different. Or the belief that you could tell someone's morality by their physical traits. Novels are a penny Novels a penny are full of phrases like his immoral lips or his clear, intelligent forehead. The assumption that moral traits could be passed on from father to son in a genetic bloodline way rather than environmental/teaching. And then she goes on to say about Ahab rushing them. He should have called it a day and returned to harbor.
mm,
What's the use of a whale if it rots at sea? Refrigerators haven't been invented yet. So what you can get, sorry. So what you get has a very clear and short expiring date, and whaling ships worked a bit like freelancing. If the hunt didn't result in sales, both captain and crew would take losses in full.
mm.
Nobody would get paid. Stretching the hunt beyond the strictly necessary is adding unnecessary risk to an already dangerous job for no extra money. Already, whaling was a toss if you'd survive or not, and if you get the money or not. Why making it worse? This is also the reason why so many Native Americans are on the ship. It's a dangerous job. You need to be both single and desperate to do it. Anyways, this email is long enough. I hope this is at least interesting to read. As usual, looking forward to the next installment of your podcast. Kind regards, Sylvia.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Sylvia, for that additional context there. I actually did get up to the chapter where what was it? They come across like a leak in one of the barrels and everyone's
Yeah.
panicking because all of the oil is spilling out. It's like, we've worked
Hmm.
so hard to get all of this. We need to fix it. And Ahab's basically like, nah, it's fine. Just leave it. Off we go to find Moby Dick once again. And he's like
Yeah.
refusing to let them go to port to actually fix the problem. So I've already gotten to that sort of desperate part of the crew where they're starting to feel a little bit, uh-oh, that this isn't good. We need to fix this or else we're not going to get paid, essentially. So yes, I was starting to get a sense of that, which is the interesting part that I've actually finally gotten to.
Yeah.
um
Excellent.
and there was a rather surprising chapter where I thought Queequeg died, But he was near death, which was what happened. He caught fever. And I thought it was quite
Mm.
sweet that Ishmael referred to him as my queequeg. And I'm like, ah, more proof that this is homoerotic. Still don't have an answer on that. I'm going to do some research.
Yes, we will do our research, and
Yes.
when we do our retrospective episode, I think we can talk in depth about all of that stuff.
Yes. Brayton, you also got another email.
Yes, we
that
did.
we
We
should
have some.
refer to.
Yes, we got in trouble
In trouble is a very liberal way of
because
describing a friend being angry at us.
yes, because
You got to write dressing down.
yeah, I did. Because I had mentioned when Sylvia first emailed in, I had mentioned that she was the first one to email in with some comments about the podcast, which we still do appreciate, Sylvia. But one of our good friends, Richie, emailed in and reminded us that he had actually sent an email in several weeks previously. I think we all just forgot about it
Yeah, we
in the
did.
moment.
I didn't, Richie.
Ah,
I never forget when people talk about my erogenous zones.
yeah, no, let's not remind people.
So he, I don't,
Not
would
reminding
you like
people
me
is
to,
why we got in trouble in the first place.
Oh, yes, you're right.
would you like me, it's quite an entertaining email. Would you like me to read it out to you?
I would
Please.
love you to read it out.
Okay. The subject line is for the attention of the not helpful podcasters, which is very true. It's in the name itself that we are not helpful and our opinions are not helpful.
Hello.
Dearest Brayton Lynham, Eloise Dundas Taylor, and Julian Enrico Fanning. I had no idea that was your middle name, Julian.
Neither did Julian.
Well,
I hope the day does find thee well and fortune smiles upon your families, for I am sad to say, am not so well. I was less than roused to find my prior correspondence to be less than adequate as judged by a Mr. Lynham's assertions when alluding to another such listener's communique by stating, you're the only person to email in with a legitimate comment about the show. Mr. Brayton Lynham in regards to an electronic mail from a third party, episode 8, timestamp 2342.
Very
He's gone to
accurate.
great
Very great
details.
detail.
And to defend myself here, Richie, was your original one really legitimate?
Yeah, I was thinking it, but we don't wish to anger him further.
oh,
Okay,
someone's gearing up for another hate mail.
You know what? Hate mail is still content. He goes on to say, did my own digital missive not satisfy? Did my remarks about the use of a term used to describe the delightful Julian Enrico Fanning's pectorable accrotonment? Oh my god, I can't say that word.
That's my nips, people.
Fail to meet a hetero unstated standard and expectations of acceptable content. It also weighs heavy on my heart that my well-intentioned and sculpted electronic telegraph fails to elicit a "that's so cool," quoted from Eloise Dundas Taylor, episode 8, timestamp 410.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Simply due to the location from where my transmission was sent, does the locality of my domicile present as less than others by association with lack of distance from originating source? Yes, my answer to that is yes, it does.
I would also say it's because we know you, Richie. You're our friend, and
Yes.
it's cooler to receive mail from strangers who decided to talk to us out of the goodness of their hearts rather than someone we know.
I think you're cool, Richie.
Stop that. Don't encourage him.
Am I unworthy of such an expression of coolness because an ocean does not part us? I say, no, sirs and madame. I feel slighted and aggrieved, and I am sorry to say have been left with no other recourse than to curse you, a hex, if you will. From here
No.
on out, may there forever be a pebble in your shoe and at least one page missing from any book you may attempt to read.
Oh, dear
Let you
God.
rue
Can you
the
imagine
day.
if it's the last page of Moby Dick that goes missing from my book? No. Curse you, Richie.
Let you rue the day you cross such a formidable foe. Kind regard, Richie K.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Richie. That's so cool that you wrote
That is, that's so cool that you emailed in from a couple of suburbs away.
Yep. Okay. So, Richie, if there's anything that we can do to make amends, please let us know.
My humblest apologies, dear sir.
I feel like the only reason I got COVID is because of that hex. So thanks.
Oh, that's true.
Thank you for the COVID. I really appreciate it.
Yes. If I lose that last page, I'm going to be very angry. Right. Well, thank you very much for our listener emails.
Yes. Maybe one day we'll get more.
Yes, if you would like to write in, we'll talk about that at the end of the podcast. In any case,
Yes.
why don't we leap into today's topic? Funnily enough, Julian mentioned about adaptations earlier in relation to watching the film of Moby Dick.
See, I'm on the zeitgeist.
Yeah, and that is what we will be talking about today.
Yes. And I do want to add that we really should announce the topic at the very start of the show. I keep forgetting to do that. We'll do better next time.
I got carried away.
But we're not helpful, so it's okay if we don't.
That's true.
I got carried away with wanting to talk about buffering.
Oh yeah, you jumped straight into that. There was no stopping you.
It's all right. We'll figure it out the next time.
We tried, people. We did. She overpowered us.
So adaptations, good and bad. What adaptations have we seen that are our favorite adaptations of novels, either television or movies, and which ones are our most hated ones? Who would like to go first?
I will start by just saying I think we can get out of the way that Lord of the Rings is probably going to be up there.
Yes. Look, let's just say Lord of the Rings is the best, hands down. Hooray for Lord of the Rings.
And yet, sadly, The Hobbit is on the other end.
Let's not talk about The Hobbit. And you know what? Look, there are parts of the Lord of the Rings adaptations that are not great. Like most of it is very, very good and it's its own thing. There's a lot of stuff that you cannot do from the book that they did very well. Very glad that they cut out the whole Tom Bombadil side quest because you don't need that. I'm sorry for Tom Bombadil lovers. No, you didn't need that in the film.
I don't know. We need Tom dancing naked with naked hobbits on a hill. I think we need that adaptation at some point.
That will be its own devoted 3-part film of just
I'm sure if you search the internet, probably not very long at all, you will find an adaptation of that scene.
Most definitely. I do like the ending.
Yes, but not directed by Peter Jackson.
No, that's true. I do like the ending of Lord of the Rings. I know people go on about
which one?
Yes,
look,
I know people go on about the 5 different endings.
I know it's a bit of a meme to go on about the endings, but that never bothered me.
No. It is a shame you don't get the scoring of the Shire. That would have been fantastic to see on film. But Peter Jackson is right in that you have already reached the climax of the story. You cannot build a climax again after a film is already 2 and a bit hours long. It would have been impossible to do. So from
nearly 4 if you watch the extended versions.
But yes.
And if he had included this, the scouring of the Shire, it would have been another hour and a half of the movie.
And at least another 3 endings. So
it's practically its own film almost. It's a whole different story. I don't mind the fact that never happened. Things I don't like about the film, or the films in general. I don't like how in the 3rd film, Peter Jackson went, "We need more drama. I know, let's set Denethor on fire and hurl him off a cliff." That was kind of silly, in my opinion. And like, I find the imagery of
how is that different? Remind me. It's been so long since I read the book. What happens in the book?
I was about to say, so what happens in the book is that it's revealed that the reason why Denethor is going slowly mad and knows things about what's happening outside of Gondor is because he has a Palantir. So he has one of the 7 lost seeing stones, and he had been looking into it and was being corrupted slowly by Sauron. And what happens is that he throws himself onto Faramir's pyre after Gandalf and Pippin rescue him and clutches the Palantir in his hands as his body burns. And then there's like a little footnote in the chapter to say, and if anyone ever found one of the last seeing stones and dared to look into it again, all they would ever see forevermore was a pair of burning hands. I'm like, oh, that's so good. So yeah, that or throw him off a cliff. Sure.
Which is more cinematic, really?
Yeah, the other one, I know. So that was my little bugbear, but like that's my opinions about Lord of the Rings. It's a great set of films. No, it's not perfect, but when you look at the source material, it was a damn hard thing to adapt, and I think it was done very well. So I don't know if you guys had any further opinions about Lord of the Rings before we moved on to other movies.
Yes, I was going to say not Lord of the Rings, but the Hobbit movies. I know
Mm,
they're often considered some of the poorer adaptations. I will say I enjoy the movies. They are not
Mm.
perfect,
no.
you know, but they are enjoyable movies. But I think, and Julie and I, we've talked about this just off the record, but they are poor adaptations of the book
Yeah.
Yes.
of The Hobbit.
Enjoyable
Right?
films, poor adaptations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Absolutely.
if
So
you've never read the books, it doesn't matter.
yeah, exactly. And I know they take a lot from the extended, not the extended editions, the appendices and the expanded world of Middle Earth.
Yeah, there's a lot of that, but even then, he kind of changes a whole bunch of stuff as well anyway. So,
Yeah, which I will not blame Peter Jackson for because the time crunch he was put under to deliver those movies.
yeah, the whole lead up of production was terrible and it wasn't how he wanted to do it. And you could tell when like you watch the sort of special features and everything, you can see how stressed he is trying to get these films pulled
Oh,
together.
there were days when they filmed nothing because they had
Mm.
no script or no ideas of what to do. So, he did the he did the best he could, in my opinion.
Eloise is slowly dying, by the way.
Sorry, I inhaled
You're
some
back?
water. Yep, I'm
Yeah,
back.
don't do that.
Um, yeah, cut all this bit out.
No,
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 leave it
this is
in.
the bit.
No.
Yeah, this is the
This
bit
is
that's
real.
staying
This
in.
is life.
Oh man. In any case, so that's sort of our opinions on Lord of the Rings. Do we want to quickly delve into the Harry Potter series?
Yes, sure. I guess we're tackling all the big ones: Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter.
So, Harry Potter in general, I think the first two movies are fantastic adaptations. I think they're very faithful to the books. It falls off the rails for me by the third film. I was very upset with the adaptation of the third film, although I seem to be in the minority about that. But they cut out so many crucial things from the books, which then become really important later. And there was a cascading effect from that. Uh,
Explain
so,
yourself. Full detail.
well, they never explain how Sirius manages to get into Hogwarts in the film, and the whole point is that he's an animagus and that he becomes an animal, and that's how he can get past the charms and guards and whatnot. They do not explain ever that Sirius and Harry's dad and Lupin and Peter Pettigrew are the four, what do they call themselves? The guys who made the Marauders map.
The
So
Marauders.
yeah, I forget
I don't know.
the name
It's
of the
been
group, but
it's
they called
again
themselves.
like Lord of the Rings. It's been so long since I've actually read the books.
Yeah, so that's completely cut out of the film, and then it's kind of like alluded to later so that people who have read the books understand. There's a lot of that going on. I read all of the Harry Potter books obviously before I saw the films, and I found that the later into the series you get, the more reliant on the fact that you've read the books those films become, because there's a lot of stuff that does simply not make sense if you have not read the source material, and I think that's what makes a bad film. If you can't adapt a film to the point where the film makes sense, then you've kind of lost it. And the last couple of films are very evident of that. There's stuff like Harry has that smashed mirror in the bottom of his bag, and he keeps seeing the blue eye in it. And if you have not read the books, you do not understand what that is. And it's a reference back to something that was cut out of the fifth film. Um, and like Dumbledore's entire backstory is cut out from the films as well. So a lot of his motivation in the films don't make sense. So I don't mind the Harry Potter films, and that's because I enjoy them because I know what's happening. Whereas I don't see how people who haven't read the books can understand or enjoy those films at all, because it's like surely they must be getting confused as to what's actually going on. And I do wonder if the new, is it HBO who's doing the television
Yeah, yeah.
series now? I like people have been going on about hating on the fact that they're rebooting it for a HBO television series. I'm like, no, that's great. I want to see this done better, essentially. That's probably a controversial opinion. Um, but
Yes,
like,
because
I mean, I enjoy the
I
films. I'll rewatch them if I want to, if they're on TV or something, or if the kids want to watch it. Um, but I really get disappointed with the adaptations from movie 3 onwards.
see. Here's the thing. I really like movie 3, and like you said, you do seem to have a difference of opinion that movie 3 is regarded as probably one of the better ones.
Yeah,
Mm.
I hear that from so many people where they love the third film. I'm like, really? Everything is
I
out of
think
order. They don't explain anything.
the thing about the third film is it's a complete departure from the first two.
Yeah, because it starts to
Um,
get dark from that
and
Mm.
point.
it's the first film that is not just focused on Harry and um, Voldemort as well. It pivots completely away from that, and yeah, it starts to get darker, as you say. So it's a very, very different style of film, and it's when the Harry Potter series, I think, went from aimed at 10, 11, 12 year olds to slightly older and
Mm.
beyond. So I think that's where a lot of its popularity comes from.
And there was a lot
Mm.
of like completely different stuff going on anyway in terms of the set, because the set was completely changed. And I mean, like Michael Gambon famously had to take over the role of Gandalf because Richard Harris had passed away.
Dumbledore.
What about Dumbledore?
You said Gandalf.
Oh shit! Oh, we were
I
talking.
understand he's derivative.
That's
I know
really funny.
Gandalf is a complete rip-off of Dumbledore. Like I can't believe they got away with that.
Michael Gambon and Ian McKellen were consistently mistaken for each other. Ian McKellen just told a story on the Graham Norton show 2 weeks ago about how recently, in the last couple of months, someone came up to him and said, "Excuse me, but are you Michael Gambon?" And he said to the woman, "I'm so sorry, my darling, but Michael Gambon is dead." And she's like, "Oh, yeah, I know that, but are you here?" And he just apparently walked away because he couldn't deal with it.
I wouldn't know how to respond to that.
No.
Yeah.
He joked that he said she's probably calling her friends saying, "I've just seen a ghost." So, yes, Dumbledore, sorry,
Yeah,
everyone. It's so
Dumbledore.
bad.
So yeah,
Yes.
so here's my thing about Harry Potter series. I generally enjoy them. I think the weakest movie, in my opinion, is probably The Half-Blood Prince.
Mm.
Yes,
But the thing
absolutely
is,
agree.
I feel like that is also an issue with the book itself, because really Half-Blood Prince and Deathly Hallows are like parts 1 and 2.
Mm,
Because Half-Blood Prince kind of ends on a cliffhanger essentially, which none of the other books did. Every other book was a self-contained story, whereas Half-Blood Prince ended, it was a to be continued. But I think the thing with Half-Blood Prince that I'll always remember, actually it was a comment by my father-in-law who came to see it, and he had not read any of the books. And I think he had maybe seen some of the movies, I'm not sure. But we all went as a big family thing to go see Half-Blood Prince. And there's the scene right at the end and where Snape is escaping Hogwarts and Harry confronts him and he starts shooting magic and Snape just kind of fobs him off and knocks him down, blah blah blah, and he gets away. And my father-in-law came out saying like, "Oh, I didn't like that scene because there should have been a moment when Harry, bests Snape and knocks him down and says, 'Yes, I'm just as strong as you. I can beat you.'" And my wife and I, who had both read the books, went, "No, there is no way Harry Potter could ever best Snape. Harry is a painfully average student at best."
yeah, they don't describe that in the films at all.
Yeah, and if you're looking at the films, and yeah, that's right. If you're looking at the films like he is the hero and we're doing the traditional hero's journey trope, there has to be that moment when he overcomes the enemy. And in that movie, especially, he doesn't. And it's Snape, who Snape himself is a great magician, but he's probably not up there as one of the most powerful ones.
Mm.
But Harry couldn't best him. And for anyone that's read the book, you're like, yeah, that tracks. Snape would floor Harry any day of the week. And it is that question of like, yeah, how much does a movie have to actually explain for that to make that make sense?
And that's why I think it'll be good to have the television series, because it can show that a lot more in a lot more detail of just how painfully average Harry is.
I think people tend to forget he's also just a 15-year-old student.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I and Eloise, you would understand this, having trained Taekwondo for many years, and when I trained martial arts for many years, you might do all right amongst your peers, but the second you step into the ring with your coach, even though they're not the best in the world either necessarily,
Oh yeah, they'll floor you.
they're going to school you. You're not going to get anywhere there. And people forget that, I think, about Harry. He's
ended
just
up
a
on my
kid.
back a number of times.
A number of times, yes. And, you know, a good sparring session with the coach means I limp for a couple of days. And I think people tend to forget that too. Yes, we know it's all about Harry and he is the hero, but he's a 15-year-old boy who doesn't really know a lot of magic at all. And he's a student coming up against Snape, who was a Death Eater.
Yeah.
So maybe that is expanded more in the books. Again, it's also been a long time since I've read them too, but I think people need to be a little more aware of that in the films as well. When they start thinking about why couldn't he do this? Why couldn't he do that?
Yeah, and that's why I come back to it relies on you having to know the source material to understand what's going on in the films. Hence why I don't think most of the films are good adaptations.
Okay, so here's my question just about in adaptations in general. And I think it's an issue that's been brought up with both talking about Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, which admittedly in modern culture probably the two biggest. Like Lord of the Rings, when did Return of the King come out? Like 2003?
2003.
Yeah.
So we're looking at 21 years ago, and we're still talking about it. 5 years ago, yeah, came out 5 years ago, and we're still talking about it now. But the question is like, how faithful does an adaptation have to be when it's translated to a screen? Like the classic example is Watchmen.
Oh,
like
yes.
I know it's a graphic novel, which still counts as reading. And I know it's essentially a one-to-one, or almost a one-to-one recreation of the comic. And same with another 300, which was another Zack Snyder film. And Zack Snyder himself admitted, at least in 300, the storyboards for the movie were the comic pages.
Yes.
So he essentially filmed a one-to-one adaptation with 300. And Watchmen, he made more changes about the ending and a few other things going in there, which is a whole other issue. But Watchmen has both, and I am a fan of the Watchmen movie. I really like it, but it's two sides of the same coin. That some fans are like, I loved the movie because it was so faithful, and others are like, I hated it because it was so faithful, and you can't just adapt it one to one. But it's that thing of people always complain, oh, this happened in the book, didn't happen in the movie. But can you adapt a book and make changes and it still be a good movie? But should we have that expectation that the movies need to be a one-to-one adaptation?
I can give a really good example, which is the one that I was actually going to talk about. And my absolute favorite adaptation of a book to a movie is Howl's Moving Castle. So Howl's Moving Castle is an anime film by Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki. It is just fabulous because it takes the source material and it doesn't adapt it faithfully to exactly what that particular book is. And I did not read the book before I saw the film. I read the book many years later, and I prefer the film because it was inspired by the book. It was inspired by the characters. It's inspired by the storyline, but it's not the storyline. It is fairly different, and it becomes its own thing. And maybe that people who will watch that having grown up reading it and loving it but would perhaps not like it as much. So maybe like my opinion is completely different to a lot of other people, but I think it, on the one hand, sometimes it's great to see something that is adapted one for one because you want to see the thing that you're imagining in your mind up on the screen. But on the other hand, I think it's also great to see something that is its own thing because film and television is a completely different medium. And you can't expect every little single thing from the book to translate well. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a really good example of that. The film by itself is a fine film. The adaptation of the book is awful. So I'm talking about the movie, so not the television series, which is its own
The
thing.
Martin
There,
Freeman one,
yes,
you mean? Yeah, okay.
because there is a lot of stuff in the book that you can only exist in the book that will make sense when you're reading it. You can't really translate that to the film because otherwise you're just literally reading out the jokes. I can't really think of a good example off the top of my head because it's been many years since I last read Hitchhiker's Guide. But that's the trouble that you will get sometimes is that certain books will have things that are relevant only to that medium that will not translate. So if you're going to do an adaptation, you need to be able to think of a clever and different way of doing it. Cloud Atlas is a really good adaptation, for example, because it took a story that is huge, and manages to put it on the screen really well. And have you either of you read Cloud Atlas?
I haven't read
No.
it. I've seen the movie. I really like the movie.
I would really recommend the book as well because it is very unique. So I can't remember how many different storylines there are. I think it's about 5 or 6 different storylines. And essentially, there is one character who it's implied is a reincarnated soul in each of the stories, and they're all connected through that particular person, essentially. But how the book works is that you get the first half of each of those stories like in a row. So you get the first half of story 1, the first half of story 2, and so on until you get to story 5 or 6. I can't remember how many there are. And it's like the middle of the book, and it tells that entire story in an arc, and then it works backwards for the end. So you get the second half of like the previous story, and then the second half of the third story, and so on. That would have been impossible for the film. Instead, the film cuts back and forth between scenes, essentially. So you're sort of getting it all being told at the same time. What I really liked about the uniqueness of the film was that it wasn't just the main character who was being reincarnated, but all of the souls around that particular character. And I know they ran into trouble because it meant that Hugh Grant, for example, became a Korean man, and Halle Berry became a white woman. Like, talking about yellowface and blackface is a whole different subject. Personally, I think it was handled rather well for the story that they were telling, for the uniqueness of the theme that they were using. But there are issues, and I can understand why people had a problem with it. So yeah, I think that's what you need, is to be able to put something uniquely on the screen that becomes its own medium as a movie that's entertaining, but still takes the spirit of the book that it's based on. As long as it's not like, I don't know, Game of Thrones is a really good example where it's really good, where it's very faithful to begin with, then it starts to diverge, and a lot of people started having a problem with certain changes being made, but it had to go in that direction because the source material was running out and they were telling their own story. And I like completely agreed with them telling their own story because you didn't necessarily have to take it from the book. It's when you get to the last season that everything starts to fall apart because they realize, oh no, well, we've written ourselves into a corner and completely forgotten all of the stuff we actually wrote about. That's also a whole different discussion in any case. Thoughts? I don't know. I've been rambling on for about 5 minutes now.
I think when we talk about a faithful adaptation and the idea of converting source material, and we talked about Lord of the Rings at the start, and I think that's a really good example of taking the source material and putting it onto screen with reverence to the source material. There were a lot of changes made. A lot of characters were either cut or melded into other characters. A lot of things were different. You get the elves showing up at Helm's Deep, for example, which doesn't happen in the books. Things like that. But the reverence for the source material is very clear throughout that trilogy, and it's very clear that he's telling the story of the Lord of the Rings in a cinematic way. And so a lot of what is in the book doesn't translate to film very well. So Peter Jackson found a different way of continuing the story on film. And so I don't think it needs to be a one-to-one shot for it to be a good adaptation. I think it needs to show reverence to that source material. When you flip that, and I'll talk really quickly, Stephen King's novels are plagued with horrible adaptations. We know this. His stuff doesn't translate well, but the most infamous one is The Shining.
Yes.
And it splits fans right down the middle, because the fact is Kubrick didn't even try and show reverence to the source material. He took the idea of a haunted hotel and he made a completely different film to what the book was actually about. Almost, in fact, in polar opposites from the film to the novel. And so, as an adaptation, it's horrible. It is a terrible, terrible adaptation. Kubrick was a master filmmaker, and the film itself, as a film, is brilliant. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. But as a fan of the novel of The Shining, it is by far the worst adaptation because it shows no reverence to the source material. It's Kubrick going, you wrote a book about a haunted hotel, so I'm going to make a film about a haunted hotel, and completely missed what King was actually writing about. So no, I don't think it has to be a one-on-one to be faithful. And I think trying to do a one-on-one adaptation of The Shining doesn't work. They proved that with the TV miniseries in the 90s.
That was awful. I remember watching that. I remember not understanding what was going on at all.
It also had its budgetary constraints and was confined by network TV's censorships. But
yeah, it was a very 90s television series.
And how the heck did they get like 3 seasons of TV out of Under the Dome?
Somehow that wound up being more disappointing than the book. But they at least try and show a reverence to the source material, and I respect that. Whereas Kubrick doesn't in any way, shape, or form. So a one-on-one doesn't always work, and I don't think we need a one. And people were talking about the Marvel universe as well. Oh, but this didn't happen in the comics. That didn't happen in the comics. And no, because a comic is a very different medium, like you said, Eloise. The written word is a very different medium to what we see on screen. But that reverence is still there for the source material. And I think that's what's important in adaptation.
But see, here's the thing I notice about the online discourse about it, is that if the movie is good, if it's a good movie, and maybe this is just the key to it, if you make a good movie based on something, whether a comic or a novel or something else, if you make that movie good, no one's going to care if it was a one-to-one adaptation. You make a bad movie,
yes,
then people are going to nitpick it to death, going, oh, it didn't work because it changed this from the book, or it changed this from the book. I think that's the crux of it, that ideally should it be that they should be focusing on just making a good movie above all else.
I think so. Like, absolutely, because it's a movie. You want to see a movie. That's why you're going to go see it. The movie has to be good, regardless of the source material. So, and what I said before, you have to be able to make the movie without people having read the source material. Because if the movie doesn't make sense without the reliance on the source material, then that's why it's really annoying. That's where it becomes really annoying, because like, well, why would I go and see this film if I don't know what's going on then? I think we've talked about the Dark Tower movie with Idris Elba was apparently just a shambles because it makes no sense whatsoever, because the Dark Tower is like, what, eight novels?
About that.
Yeah.
I think Mike Flanagan has really sort of thrown the doors open when it comes to adapting King's works. So he didn't do 1922. He did Gerald's Game, which is an amazing adaptation of what was considered an unfilmable story. But then he went and did Doctor Sleep as well. And if you haven't seen Doctor Sleep, it was the sequel to The Shining. King famously, obviously, hated the film adaptation of The Shining. And when he wrote Doctor Sleep, he wrote it as a direct sequel to the novel. And basically, a lot of what happens at the end of the film of The Shining, it's just not there. It's not even apparent in the new novel, Doctor Sleep. And yet you've got Mike Flanagan, who has managed to create a sequel to both the film and the novel in perfect parts. And that makes sense. So if you've seen The Shining but not read The Shining, you would understand Doctor Sleep. If you had read The Shining but not seen The Shining, you would understand Doctor Sleep. So yeah, I think it's finding a way to make it make sense to the audience, and that's the important part. Yeah, it's like It. I don't know if you guys have read It before, but there was a lot of complaints about that there were certain things that they cut out of the film, and I'm not talking about the sewer scene.
Okay.
No, well, you just can't film that.
No, you'd be arrested.
But things about the turtle creating the universe or the macroverse and things like that they had to cut out of the film, and it's like a lot of fans were upset with that. But then for you who have never read the book, would inserting this whole, trippy thing about a turtle creating a macroverse have made much sense whatsoever?
No.
Probably not, because you don't have that same amount of time in a film. You have 3 hours at best.
Yeah.
So I forgot what my point was.
All valid points. Funnily enough, while we were speaking, I was thinking about another Studio Ghibli adaptation, which is Tales of Earthsea. And that film was done by Goro Miyazaki, so Hayao Miyazaki's son. And there's a hilarious thought in the Studio Ghibli fandom about how Goro is forever disappointing his father because he never lives up to the expectation.
He also made that earwig one.
It's like, yeah, we won't go into that, but
yeah, that one looks horrible.
Ghibli is all about hand-drawn animation, and moving into 3D animation, I don't see the point, but that's a whole different conversation. But again, Goro tried to do what Hayao did in terms of adapting Howl's Moving Castle. He took the source material and wrote his own story. The story of Howl's Moving Castle makes sense from start to finish. Tales of Earthsea does not. He tried to base it on all 4 of the novels. He took bits and pieces out of the story, but did not make a coherent story for the film whatsoever. And even if you had read the novels, which I have, that film makes no sense. Like, nothing about it connects from start to finish. It's just a bunch of stuff. Like, the animation's fine. Again, there's the difference there, where you have a master storyteller in Hayao Miyazaki who knows how to adapt something, and then you have Goro who's kind of being thrown into his father's industry because it's expected of him and floundering a little bit because he hasn't understood the source material, or he hasn't had enough advice on how to actually write a good film script from the source material.
That seems like a good place to wrap it up.
I think so. Oh no, the fans want more.
Well, we've made at least one of our fans unhappy, so it's good time to stop.
I'm looking forward to the next hate mail from him. Yes, but I think we have concluded, when you're adapting a book to a movie, make it good, I think, is the overall.
Have you tried being better?
Yeah, let's make a good movie first. Well, I'm very excited. Speaking of adaptations, June 2 comes out this week. Yes. I am so excited about that movie.
You were very upset when it got pushed back because of the writers' strike last year.
Oh, I was so upset. The first one that's a good one of been a very faithful adaptation while also making changes which while some people did complain about, didn't really change anything about the
Yes.
overarching story or themes or anything like that. So yes, I'm really looking forward to seeing Dune Part 2. I think early buzz from what I've seen is saying it's like fantastic, like instant classic, at least in the sci-fi genre.
Well, if you have any thoughts about your favorite adaptations or even your most hated adaptations, please write in and let us know. You can do so via email or in the comments on the Facebook page. Don't forget to, as always, like and subscribe. We are on all of the usual podcast apps and on YouTube. You can follow us on Instagram now. Thank you, Brayton, for creating an Instagram account for us.
Yep.
What's the Instagram handle?
Good question. I think it's just at Not Helpful Pod. Same as our email address.
Yes.
Yep.
And
Not Helpful Pod. Just double checked.
Not helpful pod on Instagram. Is that the same for the TikTok as well?
That is, yes.
Excellent.
Oh, and buy my book
Oh, yes.
on Amazon.
Yes.
Paperback and ebook. Buy a copy. You know you want it.
I'm waiting for the hardcover limited edition before I make my purchase.
Personally signed. 1 of
Yes.
10.
Yeah. I'll just rock up at your door one day and just go, sign this, please.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Join us again in a few weeks when hopefully I have finished Moby Dick and we can do a retrospective. Once again, I am Eloise, and
Yes,
joining
you
me
are.
was. Don't stop it! Why do you keep leaving me hanging? Come on, guys, you can do it. This doesn't make for good listening. All right, that was Brayton and Julian. Thank you, guys.
Yay!
She did it.
We'll get this right one day.
No.
Okay. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.